Well, welcome to Community Read Conversation with an Author. And today we're going to be talking about the residents of Brooklyn. If you don't know already, Community Read is the library's month long effort to have the community read or listen to books of current and relevant topics and participate in discussions, book clubs, and events hosted by the library and community partners. And this year, the signature title is Tomorrow's Read by author Anna Jean Mayhew. And Anna Jean is here with us with Monique Douglas, who is a co-founder of the Brooklyn Collective. And so I'll give each of you a few minutes to introduce yourself to the audience and let us know a little bit about you.
Hi, I'm Anna Jean Mayhew, also known as AJ. I'm a native Charlottean, and in 1985, I moved to the middle of the state near Chapel Hill. And once I got there, all I wanted to write about was Charlotte. So I think I needed that distance. I was too close. And Brooklyn came to me in a kind of roundabout way, but of course I knew it the whole time I was growing up in Charlotte. And the wards, first ward, second ward, third ward, fourth ward, I knew all of them. And in my early 20s was when Brooklyn got destroyed. I'll talk just a second about my first book, which is The Dry Grass of August. It's also set in Charlotte, in the neighborhood where I grew up, in South Charlotte. And it won the Sir Walter Raleigh Award for Fiction, which was just a huge thing for me. I was a first-time novelist, published when I was 71. So I always tell people who've got white hair like me, it's never too late. My second book came out when I was 79, and I'm working on a third and possibly fourth in my 80s. So I encourage anybody out there close to my age to do it.
Thank you, AJ. And Monique, if you would like to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. I am Monique Douglas, and I am actually the executive director of the Brooklyn Collective. And I am actually a native of Nassau, Bahamas. How about that? I'm an island girl, so I tell folks I'm a Bahama mama. So, but I migrated here to Charlotte 14 years ago from the Baltimore, Washington area, and just absolutely love Charlotte. And I've been connected with the Brooklyn Collective in the past 2 years because my husband and I, aside from being the ones that manage the Brooklyn Collective, we also run our own business and our own nonprofit within the Brooklyn Collective. So we have had the opportunity to learn much about the history of Brooklyn in Charlotte, and to be dedicated to preserving that history, as we do manage two historical buildings that are two of the four remaining buildings of
Still
that
there.
neighborhood. So very excited, and thank you to the library for this opportunity to be able to speak with Anna and hear all of her wisdom.
That's a challenge.
Well, Monique, I was wondering if you could explain to us, tell us a little bit more about the Brooklyn Collective for those who don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The Brooklyn Collective is a collective in two ways. One, it is a physical collective of 3 buildings, as I mentioned, 2 of which are historic. So the 3 buildings are the Mecklenburg Investment Company building, which is celebrating 100 years this
MIC.
year. Yes, the MIC. And then the second building is the Grace, which we know is one of the first AME Zion churches,
Right.
and now celebrating this year 121 years of existence in the brick format that it's in currently. And sandwiched in between the 2 buildings is my husband and my business, which is Studio 229 on Brevard. And we say that Studio 229 on Brevard is the place where history, humanity, and artistry intersect. And so we are an annex to the MIC building that was built in the 50s, actually. Not as old as the other two buildings, but certainly has been here a part of the history and the thread of the neighborhood before it was actually destroyed in the early 60s to early 70s. So it's also a collective to the extent that it houses, just as they did in the 1900s, 9 small businesses and nonprofits. And we have an artist in residence program and a maker creator space who is a fashion designer and an embroiderer. And so we are carrying on that concept of being an incubator for businesses, providing them the resources and support that they need to grow and scale their businesses. And so our mission is to be a place of inclusivity and a place for economic and upward mobility, and then a location that celebrates the arts.
That is awesome. And I do want to say that I was able to take my niece to one of the programs that was held at the Brooklyn Collective, and she loved it. They were able to like produce their own music, and they did their own artwork. It was really amazing what y'all are doing. So this program is going to be basically just to talk about the Brooklyn residents, both fictional and real. Unfortunately, I don't have actual residents that are going to be speaking with us today, but I do have some video interviews that the Levine Museum recorded for the exhibit that's currently held at the Levine Museum of the New South. So I'll be interspersing the videos that were recorded for all of those residents throughout the program. And so we'll go ahead and get started with the first video, and it's called We Were All Family. That kind of gives you an idea of the community that was the Brooklyn neighborhood.
I was born and raised in the Brooklyn neighborhood until the urban renewal. But we were a family. My grandmother, she really took care of all the kids in the neighborhood. They would bring their kids to my grandmother's. So we were all family. We could leave our back door open all night, sleep on the floor, and nobody would bother you. We lived right in front of a store, a penny store, Bush and Thomas. That was another store that we all went to because we would just get huge snowballs, 5 cent, 10 cent. So those are some of my favorite memories. Pearl Street Park. Let's go into Pearl Street Park, rolling down the big hill at the Pearl Street Park. Second Ward High School's band would always go down there. They would practice down there, so we would go there to watch in afternoons. Yeah, we got to go to the Savoy Theater. Yeah, my father would take us there from time to time when we could afford it. We were wealthy. in our sense, we were wealthy.
So she was able to give us a little idea of what it was like in the Brooklyn neighborhood. And so a question to both AJ and Monique. How did you find out about Brooklyn? So AJ, I know you're from this area, but you didn't live in Brooklyn. And Monique, you're from the Bahamas. So how did y'all find out about Brooklyn?
Really, my knowledge of Brooklyn has come from my connection with the Brooklyn Collective. So the gentleman that actually purchased these buildings about close to 7 years ago, his name is Jason Wolf. And Jason purchased these buildings really as an investment property, not really even understanding what he had bought. And so he didn't do anything with the buildings for the first basically 3 years because there were still tenants in some of the offices, and he wanted to let these tenants, the legacy tenants, let their leases run out. He didn't want to just toss them out. And so he began in that time period kind of doing some research. He knew he had some old buildings, but he didn't quite understand what he had. So he began doing research. He read a book called The Bittersweet Legacy. And he said from that book, he learned so much about the founders, and he became very fascinated with the founders of these buildings and what they stood for and the model that they had set. He said, wow, the model they set was a perfect wheel. This was Black wealth in this particular block where we were, which is a part of the Black Wall Street of Charlotte. And he said, if the wheel was rolling and working, we don't need to reinvent it. We just need to go back and study it and then put that model back into place, which is what we've done here in the Brooklyn Collective. And so when my husband and I connected a little over 2 years ago with Jason, this is when we began our journey of learning more. We have a history advisory board at the Brooklyn Collective, which, by the way, is a nonprofit. And this history advisory board continues to feed us information on the history and finding artifacts and things that we can use as we do our education portion of educating the community on where this is, what it stands for, and making sure that we continue this legacy. And so that's really how I became connected with Brooklyn, with the neighborhood of Brooklyn.
All right. And as I said, I grew up in Charlotte. I knew Second Ward. I wasn't that familiar with Brooklyn until I became a young adult. And I'd be going to work in downtown, what we now call Uptown. And I would pass through a place where the air changed a little bit. I'm not going to call it smog, but it got a little bit maybe grayish. And I found out later, this was in the wintertime, that was from a lot of the coal stoves in Brooklyn. And I always kind of looked to my left as I went up Trade Street just to look at the neighborhood. And I sort of forgot about it. And before I forget to say this, I want to tell Monique, I also read a book called These Same Long Bones. And it's about Durham, the Hayti community, which was another of the Black Wall Streets, like Charlotte and Tulsa. And it's set in the late 40s. And I love that book. I learned so much from it about the wealthy Black citizens in Durham. When the highway in Durham opened up and wiped out Hayti, I was thrilled because I was working at Duke and it cut my commute by 10 minutes. And I didn't realize at that time what it meant. And when I found out, I thought about Brooklyn. In 2008, I was coming through Charlotte for an event for my high school reunion. And instead of going down 77 to Moorhead Street to go to my old home, I took the Brookshire. I had plenty of time, and I thought I'll just drive through Uptown. And I drove through Brooklyn, not intending to, but I did. Trade and 2nd Street and Brevard and Davidson and Caldwell, all that. And I thought, why didn't they use the land? I knew they took it, but there's all this empty land. And of course, part of what I was looking at was Marshall Park, but there was a lot of open land. So that was 2008. My first book was accepted in 2009 in a 2-book deal. So I needed to write a second one. And I thought about Brooklyn. And all along, all I could think about was, where did those close to 2,000 people go? The men, the women, and the children, the doctors, the lawyers, the professors, the teachers, the librarians, the business people. Where did they go? So that, for me, was the genesis of my interest and curiosity about Brooklyn. I love the Brooklyn Collective. I love what you're doing. I remember when the Mecklenburg Investment Company caught my attention when I was doing my research, and I thought, wow, that's where the businessmen and women were, mostly men, I think.
Thank you both. Y'all have a lot of information about Brooklyn. I did a no CLT tour with a group of library customers. We walked past the Brooklyn Collective, and I don't even think Monique knew that there was a no CLT tour, but she saw a group of people just walking past the 229 studio, and she poked her head out and she said, "How are y'all doing?" And she just invited us into the space. She gave us the history of the space and then let us see the studio. And so I just want to thank you, Monique. So I know AJ was talking about how she made that trip when she got older, past what used to be Brooklyn, and saw that it was gone. And so I just wanted to play a video where the Brooklyn residents talk about when they were displaced.
I was involved in urban renewal as an appraiser. Attorney Bell had the court to commission me as appraiser because of the prices difference that was coming in, and I had just started in the real estate business. Got my license in May 1966, so there was a tremendous difference in prices. But I was able to stabilize that because I did the research to do the appraisals and sit down with the other appraisers and come to a conclusion as to what was fair. And doing the appraisals, you would go and find out what other homes were sold for. And during this period of time, there was not a lot of people buying. So most of the appraisals were based on what the sales prices were. And there was a difference in what they were paying for black homes as what they were paying for whites.
You guys have already spoken about kind of how your knowledge of Brooklyn became the Brooklyn Collective. I was wondering, maybe Monique, if you had any information about the current buildings that are still standing, if any offers were ever made. Back when urban renewal was happening, do you know if there was ever any offer made?
Well, I know that with the Grace, I know that there were it's transferred hands, right? I do know also that what was really interesting, I read a transcript from that was an interview that was done with an attorney that was actually working with making sure that the churches in Brooklyn got their fair value as the land was being presented to be sold during the urban renewal timeframe. I mean, it's really cool to us that the Grace is still here, despite a lot of the others being sold and torn down. And it's an interesting story because someone said that they believe that the reason that the church is still here is because the equipment that it would take to bring in to actually destroy this particular structure would would be so crazy expensive and costly and a big venture to be able to not. So I said, well, this must have been meant to stay standing.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It was
right?
destiny.
This was meant to stay standing. But I do know that the congregation that actually held their services, the actual Grace congregation that held their services in that church, actually moved out of the church, which was why it also became available for sale. They were moved out of the church, or they decided to move out of the church because when the city took over the parking around the church, parishioners could no longer afford to have to pay for parking to be able to come to services. And I thought that was so sad. But again, as they say, quote, progress, these are the different ways that it impacts people's ability to be able to, to do the things they're normally accustomed to doing on a weekly basis. And now the Grace congregation that was there has now relocated off of Sugar Creek at David Cox on the other side of town. Right. So that's just a little tidbit on that.
I think that was something that we learned during another one of the programs where they were saying it was just too expensive to get these last 3 buildings torn down. And so that's why pretty much they were still standing.
Mm-hmm. They were waiting for us.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So some of the other buildings that were destroyed were schools. So we're going to take a look at a video from the residents about the school.
It was a great sense of loss because That's where I grew up at, went to school. I walked to Myers Street, and I walked to Second Ward and went there from junior high school to high school and graduated from there. And of course they tore Second Ward down and Myers Street also. So where a lot of people have memories of their high school and elementary schools, I no longer have that. I talk about it and they're like, well, where was that? So it's kind of hurtful to not have a place to go to say, this is where I was, this is where I graduated from, this is where I went to elementary school. Plus, we got scattered as families that we grew up with, went to school with, and went to church with. We all got scattered to different sections of the town. So you didn't see people as often. We lost a sense of community, and it was hurtful. They also promised us that they would rebuild Second Ward, and they have not. They've destroyed everything that we have ever had. The only thing that's really there is the last new building that they built and the gymnasium. So I have nowhere to go. We have nowhere to go to say, this is my school. This is where I graduated from. And it's really sad that they made a promise to us during redevelopment that they would rebuild Second Ward, and they did not.
So AJ, I know school is a really big part of the story in Tomorrow's Bread. I know when we first meet Lorayla, she's getting Hawkerson ready for the day and taking them to Myers Street School. And spoiler alert for anybody who has not read the book, when they move at the end of the novel, what school were you imagining that Hawk and Desmond would attend?
Oh, that's a great question, Yolanda, and it's one I have no answer to. They were living up near Johnson C. Smith, and back in the 60s, I know there were elementary schools there, but whether they were white or black, I don't know. And this was before the integration finally of the schools in Mecklenburg County. After Brown v. Board, it was 17 years before there was an elementary school integrated, and my children were on the first bus out of the white suburbs. And that is I don't have an answer to it. Before I go further, though, I want to say to Monique, you know Gwendolyn Jackson? Yeah, she interviewed me for the Charlotte podcast. That was just wonderful. One last thing about the opening of my book. Yeah, it talks about Myers Street School, and I loved seeing the Jacob's Ladder fire escape picture. And it also mentions Pearl Street, and it mentions Sugar Creek, which was called Little Sugar at that point, and the tunnel under Independence Boulevard. And a lot of people say, tunnel? And I was in that tunnel. I remember that tunnel. And then it was closed up because it became a place for street people to go and live in bad weather. So it was sealed off at both ends. For a while, they had the principals of the school. They would lock the gates to the tunnel, and the principals had to go open the gates. How ridiculous is this, you know? So, but they did it because two little boys trying to get to school were hit by cars on Independence Boulevard. But a lot of people don't know some of the things that are in the book geographically. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you for sharing that. And Monique, the Brooklyn Collective is, or has, I guess, kind of restored the remaining buildings in the Brooklyn neighborhood. Is it possible that the Myers Street School will become part of the Brooklyn Collective? I think CMS still owns it, but could it be an art gallery or studio space?
Again, because it is two separate entities, and they're not really actually close. I mean, they're close, but not close. Don't really know what the future connection could be. I'm sure what might be really cool is a collaboration between, you know, those two entities. And it would be lovely. Of course, you know, we're so much about art. It would be lovely if they would put a gallery in there. I think one of the greatest things that we would like to see happen here, and which would, when I talk about collaboration, would be really cool, is to really have children come on tours. You know, if
Yes.
if we could arrange a connection with CMS schools to have buses dropped off at different locations that were a part of Brooklyn and kind of tie it all together in a story for the children, so that this is how the legacy continues to move on, that no matter how much big and shiny is built here in our city, that the legacy of this neighborhood does not die. And not just this neighborhood, but numerous neighborhoods in Charlotte that had similar things happen to them. You know, it would just be beautiful to be able to collaborate together for the sake of the next generations. I think that that's really something that we
Absolutely.
would love to see happen.
Maybe CMS could just use the No CLP app to kind of help move that forward. That would be great. I
Yes,
might be
would be
able to.
awesome.
I'll see if Meryl will
Is that a
suggest that.
is that a project? Did I just give a project?
Maybe. So I also have a video. I know we've talked about schools, but also about churches. And I know that the AME, the Grace, is part of the Brooklyn Collective. And so we'll watch this video about the churches and then talk a little bit about it.
One of the things the urban renewal did was to force churches out of close proximity to each other in Brooklyn and to scatter out, and most of them ended up going to what was then called the West Side. I was quite ecumenical. You know, I did the circuit. Each one of them was slightly different. Each one of them contributed to my overall outlook, my ability to meet different people, to understand how folks celebrated religious beliefs differently. The House of Prayers annual parade would come between the block that I lived in and Friendship. The bands would go by, but the big float that had Daddy Grace on it would go by, and you could just look. I mean, you know, I'm standing here, and I could almost reach out and touch him as he would be sitting in a big chair, and he would reach down and be throwing candy or something out there, you know, and you could see his long fingernails and flowing hair, you know, the whole 9 yards. My grandfather would take me to Friendship one Sunday. My grandmother would take me to 7th Street. My mother would take me to Mount Moriah Primitive Baptist. You know, the Primitive Baptist, you know, that was a foot wash Baptist, and by foot wash I mean they literally washed, you know, feet. My grandmother would take me to 7th Street. 7th Street was kind of the elite kind of silk stocking operation, and Friendship was somewhere in between. But over the years, a lot of the elite political leadership that you would have found when I was very young at a 7th Street migrated to a Friendship. I mean, you know, things change as the community changes and as the local places where people lived changed.
All right. So we will have a separate video about Grace in a little bit. But AJ, I wanted to ask you, St. Timothy's Second Presbyterian was introduced to the readers pretty early on in the novel. How important was religion to Tomorrow's Bread?
I'll speak first to the introduction of the church. St. Timothy's is fictional, but it was located in the building where Brooklyn Presbyterian was, and I chose that on purpose. And then I had to learn about the difference between like Selwyn Avenue Presbyterian, which is the church that I grew up in, Southern Presbyterian, Southern White Presbyterian. And I had to learn the difference between that and what the kind of church services that were held at Brooklyn Presbyterian, aka St. Timothy's. And the reason I chose the minister of that church, churches were sort of levelers in Brooklyn. The poorest and the richest would go there and practice the same religion. And it was, as I think Monique mentioned, a family, or maybe it was the first interview. It became a family, not just a religion, a church. And the ministers were leaders in the community. along with doctors and lawyers and other professionals. But the ministers were out on the street being leaders. So I chose him on purpose, Reverend Polk, and really had to educate myself, as I said, about the difference in the kind of religion we were practicing in South Charlotte and what they were practicing in Brooklyn.
Did you plan to make religion a huge part of the story? Was that something that you felt the characters always came back to? I know you just mentioned that it was a leveler, but was it its own character in Tomorrow's Bread?
You know, I never thought of it that way, but absolutely it was. One of the big questions toward the end of the book is, where is Reverend Polk's congregation going to go? And because they were spread, I mean, spread out, they were no longer in the same neighborhood. He was concerned, of course, naturally, that he was going to lose a big chunk of his congregation. And so he had to find another place for St. Timothy's, and he did. I don't go into that a whole lot. But the thing about religion that to me became really important in the book was, here was a minister with doubts, and he was preaching from the pulpit, from the St. James Bible, King James Bible, things that he wasn't sure he believed in. And yet he had to keep this front because religion was so important. And toward the end of the book, he meets a white woman who's kind of crippled. She's got really bad arthritis and bad hips and that kind of thing. And he sort of meets her by accident. And by the time they finish talking and she hobbles off toward Independence Boulevard, he realizes that what he can do is be kind and be there and receive the people, and just not exactly set his doubts aside, but for the purpose of being a minister, not dwell on them. And it was a big revelation for him. And religion was incredibly important to the story and to the neighborhood, to the township of Brooklyn.
Oh, thank you for that. And so we'll show a short video about Grace AME Zion and some of the church members who attended.
About our movement, I'll just simply add, this is a story of adults coming to face reality, and we may even say, as David described it, grim reality, that you had to move on. Or while we knew that the time had to come, we were fairly much pushed into it by the events that happened around us.
It was like we had no say-so about anything. Whatever we came up with, they were like, no, 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 you have to go.
The emotions around this building were and still very strong and attached themselves physically to this building.
It represented so much in the history of Charlotte, the history of Black Charlotte. It having been designed by a Black architect, to be built by Black craftsmen.
The blessing perhaps is that we did move. We had to move. If we were going to be a growing church, we had to move. The continued blessing is perhaps that this building is still here. And if we ever need to, we can buzz right by it, take a look, and sentimentally go through what we remember about this building.
Monique, I was just wondering how Grace is used now.
So the Grace is a performing arts center. So that Blumenthal Performing Arts utilizes for community programming and community theater and music. It's still in conjunction with and in partnership with the Brooklyn Collective. So like I said, it is the third building that makes up the Brooklyn Collective. And it is definitely live and active. In fact, this weekend, we're actually, my husband and I are hosting a Black Fine Art Fair, and the exhibition is happening in the Grace. And so, which is just perfect for a continuation of enhancing talent and also entrepreneurship when we think about artists who are entrepreneurs. So we really do, as we say, this is a corner for artistry. So it's performing arts in the Grace, musical arts in Studio 229 on Brevard, because we amplify local music talent. Our genre is jazz. And then there is visual arts in the Mecklenburg Investment Company building, in the base of that building. So artistry everywhere, but it is definitely active.
All right, and we definitely saw that artistry on display. In the video, they show the mural that's outside of the building. Could you talk a little bit about that mural?
Absolutely. The mural is actually a collage of a couple of photographs by Abel Jackson, who is a local artist and muralist here in the city. And actually, Abel is also getting ready to do a mural on the back of the Mecklenburg Investment Company building in conjunction with our exhibit Still Standing, which is the current exhibit in the MIC building honoring the 100th year anniversary. And so Abel will be doing a new mural, so you all will get a chance to come by and see it when it gets done. But the mural that is on the side of Studio 229 on Brevard, and you see it as you're approaching the Grace, that mural depicts three of the founders of the Mecklenburg Investment Company building. And it also depicts three young men who actually, the real picture with those three young men, they are actually looking at the rubble from the destruction of Brooklyn. That's what the real, it's a black and white photo that is out there that depicts that. But what Abel did is he took those same three young men and had them looking at the buildings themselves as they were in their heyday. And then above those buildings, as if they are looking down upon them, you see the three of the founders. So it's a really, really powerful mural. And it really helps to just continue the concept of the legacy there.
Thank you. And if anybody gets a chance to go out there and look at the mural, I think the Brooklyn Collective also has a QR code that kind of gives you a video and an explanation of that mural as well. So I have one more video that I wanted to show, and it's called Looking to the Future.
Economically, I think there should be some means of being able to put us back on a level playing field to compete with today's market. Because if we had been able to grow from where we were, we would be more competitive today. And just to eliminate everything and take it out from under our feet, and everyone else were able to continue to grow, we have been put behind the 8 ball. There is a means and method of being able to keep us in a position of comfort as opposed to being in a position of economic mobility. Affordable housing is great, but if we were able to economically to compete, we wouldn't need affordable housing. What we would need is housing. And we keep talking about affordable housing. In other words, we're telling people, well, this is good for you. Don't compete with us. Just stay where you are. Be comfortable. And the sad thing about it, a lot of us going for it.
Mm-hmm. I'll start because I was so moved by him saying, this is good for you. And that was the message that was given to the residents, the close to 2,000 people who had to leave. And we'll help you. And we'll help you find a new place to live. We'll help you live. We'll help you move. And those things didn't happen. And as was mentioned earlier, the real estate values were terrible for the things that were torn down in Brooklyn in comparison with nearby white housing. I heard about Brooklyn Village. It's going to be a tall, multi-purpose building and supposedly affordable housing all the way up to penthouse is what I've heard. Every time I hear that word, those words, Brooklyn Village, it almost makes me sad, because while I'm glad they're using the name Brooklyn, it's like that's something fondly to be remembered. And that's not the way it was. It was torn down because it was too close to the square. The land was too valuable. There's no other reason for it. So I'm glad the name Brooklyn is going to be preserved. But what my fondest hope would be that it'll be preserved for the memories that are there of the real Brooklyn village, of the town within a town, and the people who lived there. That's my hope. That's my envision, my future vision of Brooklyn.
I think that to piggyback on that, and that was good, Anna, that was good. To piggyback on that, I would say in addressing the question that was raised in the chat, which was a really good question, is, do you think they will go back and claim that name for the neighborhood like they've done in some other areas like Noda? And, I'm not quite sure. I almost feel, and I hate to have to say it like that, but I almost feel as though people don't even want to really say the name Brooklyn. So it's kind of like they skirt around trying to they want to call things other things, call it what it is. It is Brooklyn. It is Brooklyn. And it's really interesting. They're doing, street renamings. And so many of us here at the collective, were among the ones that proposed Brooklyn as a name for the street that's being renamed. Let's go back to using the name. And so, of course, we don't quite know what the actual name is going to be. I was hearing them leaning towards something connected to Harvey Gantt, or something like that. But it would be very nice if we could go back to calling this neighborhood Brooklyn, which is what it was. And the thing about it is, as I explain when I do tours, this was not some little cul-de-sac. This was over 1,400 homes and over 275 businesses. This was huge. So it would be wonderful, out of respect, if they would go back to calling it what it was. And that's a sure way to make sure that the name continues the legacy continues on, and that the stories don't get watered down. But the best that we can do is what we have control over, right? So the Brooklyn Collective, we're getting ready to have a flag done on our flag staff that we will have the name Brooklyn appearing on that flag. So, you like that? Do you like that, Jackson?
That's wonderful. Wonderful.
Whatever we can do that we have control over, that's what we're going to do. We're really hoping that with some beautification plans that the city is claiming that they're going to do in around this area, that we can maybe have a say-so in them somewhere, putting that name in those plans. So it really takes everyone raising the question. That was a great question, and we all need to be asking it. Hello, can we find a way? And I want to add this one little historical piece that maybe a lot of people don't know. And a lot of people do ask, why was the neighborhood called Brooklyn anyway?
Brooklyn, New York.
Why? Right. And so just from a historical standpoint, the fact that when a lot of the freed slaves migrated to Brooklyn, New York, this Brooklyn, New York became what other African Americans around the nation looked at as a Mecca. And so what you find is that there are neighborhoods called Brooklyn all over the nation. These Black neighborhoods that were just wanting to say that they shared in a piece of that feeling of freedom that Brooklyn, New York was known for. And so it's not surprising that there was a neighborhood
Yeah.
called Brooklyn, although this one was very large. And as we know, it was called a city within the city. And it had its own infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so it's just really, like I
Yeah.
say, it's a blessing for us to be able to have our share in
Yeah.
continuing the legacy here and telling the stories.
Yeah. I have one other thing to add to that. I just love what I just heard. Brooklyn was called Log Town before it became Brooklyn. And
Yes.
I've always been curious about that. I've never been able to nail down the Log Town, but at any rate,
I can give you that
anybody who's
background.
curious. Oh,
I can give you
good.
that background.
What is it?
Yeah. So
Okay.
What you may not realize is that from an elevation standpoint, Brooklyn was one of the lowest points in the city. So
Because
all
of
of
the creek. Yeah. Yeah.
So all of your sewage and the water and everything drained down into this area.
Yeah.
So you will notice that the homes were built on stilts, right?
Stilts. Yeah.
Yes. And the conditions here were not the most favorable because of that.
Right.
And so, but also those homes were made, they used back then the logs to build those homes down in that area at the time.
Okay.
And so that was a part of the reason why it was referred as such. But yeah, it was definitely Log Town before Brooklyn. Absolutely.
Wow. Add to that, if anybody would like to hear interviews with people who lived in Brooklyn before the ones that we've seen today, the UNC Charlotte archives have oral interviews that were made in the early 2000s. And without those, I could not have captured the voices of the people in Brooklyn. So if you're curious about that, you can go to the UNC Charlotte Library and find out how to get those interviews. I've got one that has nothing to do with what we're doing today. I'm sitting here on 7th Street and I'm looking north. And my last job here was in Spirit Square back in the 80s with Charlotte Opera. And none of this was here. And my office was sitting on 7th Street looking north. And it's just amazing to me what's happened in this city, including Second Ward, since I left here.
Yeah, it's amazing. What I would say is come on by the Brooklyn Collective. And because the Brooklyn Collective is a community location, right? That is what we're about. We're here for community, culture, and collaborations. And so we want the community to come out. This is a nonprofit. So come out and learn how you can contribute to the programming and the good work that is being done out of here, because we certainly welcome the community's involvement, whether that's through volunteering or whether that's through donations and sponsorships. All of that is available for the community to feel a part of what is going on. So please feel free to pop in. Best thing is to reach out to us, because we're not open all the time, but you can certainly reach out to me directly. They have my information there on the screen. And and please reach out and let's schedule an appointment for you to come through and check us out. We love it.
Well, thank you both for being here today. There is a message, I'm not sure who it is, it's iPhone, that says, "I am coming by."
Yes.
But this has been a great presentation.
On the way.
Yeah. Well, actually, just to let you all know, open to the public. Open to the public from tomorrow through Sunday. We have the fine art fair. So you all will not believe this artwork. It is absolutely amazing. And these artists appear in some of the top galleries throughout the nation, including some in the Smithsonian and the Met Museum. So this is fine art, and it is here. It's free to attend. And if you reach out to me, I can send you the link to register yourself to be able to come out, and you can enjoy both the art as well as we have artists talk on tomorrow evening. And then also on Sunday, an artist talk. And then we have live jazz that you can
Oh,
enjoy, yes, on both Friday and Saturday evenings. And it's all free, all free. So please reach out and I can let you know how you can make sure you register to attend.
And both of you for sharing all of your knowledge about Brooklyn and for sharing the information about your book. And we look forward to be participating and being part of the Brooklyn Collective.
and
So just
thank you. Yeah, thank you,
Thank you so
Yolanda
much.
and Meryl and Sheila Baumgardner and everybody. This has been a wonderful experience for me.
Yes, and likewise. And Anna, it's a pleasure meeting you and the
Same here.
other guests that are on the line. And we're gonna try and keep that Brooklyn name going. Jackson, yes,
Yes,
yes. Look for that
yes,
flag. Look for
yes.
that
That's my
flag.
son, Monique. That's my
Is it?
son.
Oh
Yeah,
wow!
yeah,
Yes, that's
yeah,
awesome. Well, I
yeah,
can't wait to meet you all in person.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And everybody, just remember to visit the cmlibrary.org/community read page for information about more upcoming programs throughout the month of March. And we hope that you join in on the Community Read Challenge. Thank you for joining us today. Have a good
All
evening.
right. Take
Thank you.
care.
Bye.
Bye
Bye.
bye.